At 1:40 she shopped at p.m. on a warm Saturday afternoon in late May. A single phone call reached the Ridgemont Police Department. The kind of call that arrives without a name, without evidence, and without accountability. The caller claimed there was a suspicious black male near Ridgemont High School, wearing military clothing, possibly armed, possibly impersonating a service member. No description beyond skin color. No behavior reported. No threat identified. Just suspicion. Just fear. Just assumption. Officer Dustin Hargrove took the call. 16 years on the force. Known internally as aggressive. Proactive. The kind of officer supervisors praised for taking initiative. What rarely made it into official summaries were the 11 civilian complaints filed against him over 9 years, each alleging racial profiling, each dismissed with identical language. Insufficient evidence to sustain. In Hargrove's mind, this call required no verification. He had acted on tips like this before and had never faced consequences. Responding forcefully wasn't a risk. It was routine. But what Hargrove failed to consider was where this call had come from and when. Ridgemont High School wasn't just any location. It was hosting its graduation ceremony. More than 2,000 people were gathered on the football field. Parents, grandparents, children, teachers, and cameras. 2 official district livestream cameras were broadcasting the ceremony to hundreds of families watching from home. A Channel 4 news crew was set up near the stage. Dozens of parents held their phones steady, recording what they believed would be one of the happiest moments of their children's lives. Hargrove assembled 3 officers, activated body cameras, and headed toward the school without confirming a single detail from the call. In that moment, driven by habit and unchecked confidence, he made a decision that would not only end a ceremony, but permanently alter his own future. In the front row of folding chairs, just feet from the stage, sat Senior Chief Petty Officer Nathaniel Nate Garrison. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, his body was completely at rest. He was 44 years old, a Navy SEAL with 24 years of active service. A man who had spent most of his adult life training his nervous system to stay alert, to stay ready, to expect danger. He had been shot at in 6 countries, carried wounded teammates through smoke and fire, and made decisions under pressure that never made the news and never would. But none of that mattered here. Today, Nate wasn't a SEAL or a senior chief or a weapons expert. He was a father watching his daughter graduate. He wore his Navy dress whites because she had asked him to. Pressed perfectly. Medals aligned in precise regulation order across his left chest. 3 bronze stars. 2 purple hearts. Above them, the gold SEAL trident. An insignia earned through years of physical and mental punishment that most people could not survive, let alone complete. His name, Garrison, was stitched clearly in black letters. Impossible to miss. On his left sat his mother, Barbara Garrison, 71 years old, a retired schoolteacher in a lavender dress, her hands folded tightly in her lap, smiling through tears. On his right sat his 14-year-old son, Elijah, clutching a hand-drawn sign that read, "That's my sister," written in red and blue marker. This was the moment Nate had promised himself he would never miss. The moment that made every sacrifice feel worth it. And as he looked toward the stage, unaware of the officers already moving in his direction, he believed, just for a moment, that nothing could take this away. Amara Garrison stepped up to the podium as the afternoon sun dipped just enough to soften the heat. her graduation cap sitting perfectly over hair she had brushed and rebrushed that morning with hands still trembling from excitement. 18 years old. Valedictorian. Accepted into multiple Ivy League schools. She took a slow breath and looked out over the crowd of more than 2,000 people who had come to witness this moment. The field fell quiet as her voice carried through the speakers. Steady but warm. Practiced from weeks of rehearsals in her bedroom. She didn't start with grades or accolades or future plans. She started with a story. She spoke about a man in the front row wearing a white uniform covered in medals he never talked about. A man who missed birthdays because he was in places she was never allowed to name. A man who came home with scars he never complained about, but with love he never failed to give. As she spoke, parents leaned forward, students wiped their eyes, and cameras zoomed in, capturing the raw sincerity in her voice. Nate lifted his gaze to the stage, his jaw tightening as emotion rose in his chest, his eyes glassy but unblinking. His mother reached over and squeezed his arm. Elijah raised his sign a little higher. This was the speech Amara had practiced more than 40 times. The speech she had written as a thank you to the man who taught her discipline, courage, and quiet strength. And as she found her father in the crowd and smiled, neither of them knew that these would be the last uninterrupted words she would ever speak at her own graduation. From the far edge of the graduation field, beyond the rows of folding chairs and proud families, 4 uniformed figures emerged and began walking with deliberate purpose. They did not scan the crowd. They did not pause or confer. Officer Dustin Hargrove led the group straight down the center aisle, his body camera already recording. Flanked by 3 officers whose lenses captured the scene from multiple angles, they passed grandparents fanning themselves in the heat, parents clutching programs, children squirming in their seats, moving past hundreds of white families without a second glance. Their path never wavered. It aimed directly toward the front row, directly toward the only black man wearing a military uniform. As they approached, a subtle ripple of confusion moved through the crowd. Heads turning, phones lowering, conversations trailing off into uneasy silence. On the live stream, viewers at home saw 4 dark uniforms advancing toward a man dressed in white. On the news camera, the framing tightened. Sensing something unfolding, Nate felt the presence before he saw it. A familiar instinct stirring in his chest. But this time, there was no threat to assess. No mission to execute. Hargrove stopped directly in front of him, blocking his view of the stage and his daughter mid-sentence. "Stand up," he ordered, his voice firm and loud enough for nearby rows to hear. "I need identification and proof that this uniform belongs to you." The accusation landed heavy in the open air. An implication of stolen valor, of deception, of criminality, captured instantly by body cameras, live stream feeds, broadcast news, and dozens of phones now raised again. Amara's voice faltered at the podium as she saw movement in the front row. Her words trailing off into silence carried across the field, while Nate looked up calmly, composed, unaware that in this moment, in front of everyone he loved, his life was about to fracture. Nate didn't stand. He stayed seated, his posture steady, his hands resting calmly on his knees as he looked up at the officer blocking his view of the stage. His voice, when he spoke, was low and controlled, the voice of a man trained to keep order when chaos pressed in. He introduced himself clearly. Senior Chief Petty Officer Nathaniel Garrison, United States Navy, and gestured to the name stitched across his chest, to the medals aligned over his heart, to the gold trident catching the sun. He explained that his military identification was in his jacket pocket and asked, politely and directly. What crime he was suspected of committing. Hargrove responded with a dismissive wave of his hand, brushing aside 24 years of service as if it were costume jewelry. "Anyone can buy that stuff online," he said, his tone sharp, impatient, recorded from every angle. The words cut through the air, and a murmur rippled through the surrounding rows as parents and graduates struggled to understand what they were witnessing. Nate's jaw tightened, a small movement captured by a side camera, and he spoke again, reminding the officer that under the Fourth Amendment, reasonable suspicion was required. Before he could finish, Hargrove cut him off, his voice hardening into a threat, telling him he would not ask again. And then, through the stadium speakers, carried across the entire field and into hundreds of living rooms watching the live stream, Amara's voice broke. "Dad." The single word echoed. Filled with confusion and fear, Nate lifted his eyes toward the stage, meeting his daughter's gaze for a brief second, and mouthed that he was okay, even as the weight of 2,000 watching eyes pressed down on him and the officer's hand gestured sharply toward the aisle, ordering him to step out of the row. Nate rose slowly, deliberately, his white dress uniform lifting above the seated crowd as he stepped into the aisle, a stark contrast against the dark police uniforms closing in on either side of him. He moved carefully past folded chairs and stunned faces, murmuring quiet apologies to families who instinctively pulled their children closer as the officers passed. His mother reached out and gripped his sleeve, her fingers trembling, tears already spilling down her cheeks as she whispered for them to stop, for someone to explain what was happening. One of the officers pushed her hand away without looking at her, a small, dismissive motion that was captured by body cameras and by at least a dozen phones raised in disbelief. Elijah sprang to his feet, his handmade sign crumpling in his fist, his face flushed with anger as he took a step toward the officer who had touched his grandmother. Nate turned instantly, his voice calm but absolute, telling his son to sit down and take care of her. The tone of command unmistakable even in this moment of humiliation. Elijah froze, chest heaving, then obeyed, dropping back into his seat as his grandmother collapsed against him, sobbing. Nearby, the school principal hurried in from the edge of the stage, pleading with the officers that Nate was an invited guest, a parent, a decorated veteran. But Hargrove ignored her entirely. He guided Nate onto the open grass beside the ceremony, positioning him in full view of the stage, the crowd, and every recording device present, then began to pat him down, hands pressing against the crisp fabric of the dress whites, knocking medals out of alignment, tilting the trident, while Amara stood frozen at the podium, watching her father being searched in front of everyone she knew. Hargrove's hands moved with practiced force, sliding over Nate's uniform as if he were any other suspect pulled off a street corner, not a father standing beside his daughter's graduation ceremony. He reached into the jacket pocket and pulled out a military identification card, holding it up in front of his body camera. Department of Defense. The photograph matched the man in front of him. The name matched the letters stitched across the uniform. The rank matched the medals. For a brief moment, doubt flickered across Hargrove's face. A pause caught from the side angle of another officer's camera. The moment when everything could have stopped. A reasonable officer would have ended it there, apologized quietly, and walked away. Instead, Hargrove hardened. He declared the ID could be forged and announced they were taking Nate in for identity verification. Nate's voice remained steady, though the strain beneath it was unmistakable as he stated clearly, for the record, that the arrest was unlawful and that he did not consent. The response was immediate. Hargrove pulled out his handcuffs, and the metallic click echoed across the suddenly silent field, amplified by the microphones and carried through the live stream. He seized Nate's wrists and locked the cuffs behind his back, the steel biting into his skin as the crowd stared in disbelief. At the podium, Amara screamed her father's name, the sound ripping through the ceremony and into hundreds of homes watching live. Students burst into tears. Parents stood shouting. Phones shook as people tried to keep recording. Nate was turned and led away, his white uniform blazing in the afternoon sun, medals catching the light with every step as he was marched across the field in handcuffs. The proudest day of his life unraveling in full public view, recorded from every angle. Impossible to deny. Impossible to erase. The moment Nate was led away, the ceremony collapsed into chaos. Amara's knees buckled at the podium, her hands gripping the wood as teachers rushed from the side of the stage to keep her from falling. Her sobs poured through the live microphone, carried across the field and into every live stream feed, into every phone recording, into living rooms where families watched in stunned silence. Students in caps and gowns cried openly in their seats. Parents stood shouting at the officers, retreating toward the parking lot, some demanding answers, others already dialing news stations, school officials, anyone who would listen. In the front row, Barbara Garrison struggled to breathe, her chest rising in sharp, uneven gasps as she clutched her son. Her lavender dress darkened with tears. Elijah wrapped his arms around her, 14 years old and shaking with rage and helplessness, his eyes fixed on the space where his father had just stood. The principal stood frozen at the edge of the field, phone pressed to her ear, her voice raised as she demanded to speak to the police chief, trying to explain that an innocent man had just been arrested in front of 2,000 witnesses. But the damage was already spreading beyond the grass and folding chairs. Viewers watching the district live stream began screen recording the moment the handcuffs appeared. Parents uploaded phone footage within minutes. By the time Nate reached the patrol car, clips were already circulating online, labeled, shared, and reposted. The image of a decorated Navy SEAL in dress whites being taken away from his daughter's graduation, igniting outrage far beyond Ridgemont High School. At the Ridgemont Police Department, the fluorescent lights of the booking area cast a harsh, colorless glow over Nate's white dress uniform as he was led inside, hands still cuffed behind his back. The charges entered into the system were as hollow as they were severe suspected identity fraud, failure to comply with a lawful order. Officer Hargrove's body camera recorded the intake process from his perspective, the routine movements of a man who believed he was still in control of the narrative. But when the booking officer looked up from the screen, everything shifted. Sergeant Victor Padilla, a Marine veteran with 2 deployments to Fallujah, recognized the gold trident instantly. His eyes moved from the insignia to the medals, then back to Nate's face. Disbelief settling in, quietly, almost to himself. He asked how a Navy SEAL ended up in handcuffs at his child's graduation. Padilla ran the identification through official channels, and within minutes, the truth filled the monitor active duty. Senior Chief Petty Officer, 24 years of service, top secret clearance, multiple combat decorations. Everything Nate had said on that field was verified beyond doubt. Padilla turned the screen so Hargrove could see it, his voice flat as he stated that the man in custody was exactly who he claimed to be. The body camera captured the silence that followed, the moment where denial should have ended. Instead, Hargrove doubled down, insisting the arrest was justified, claiming non-compliance and public disturbance. What he didn't realize was that while he argued under fluorescent lights, the video from the graduation was already exploding across the internet. Millions of viewers watching the truth unfold frame by frame. And the system he had relied on for years was beginning to turn its full weight against him. By Sunday morning, the story had moved faster than any internal report ever could. The live stream footage had been clipped, slowed down, and reposted across every major platform, each angle telling the same story with brutal clarity. 9 different recordings showed the same sequence of events, officers walking past hundreds of white families, stopping at the only black man in a military uniform, dismissing his credentials, and arresting him without cause. Veterans organizations reacted first, flooding social media with messages of outrage and solidarity. Retired SEALs posted photos of their own tridents with a single caption repeated again and again, "We know our own." The United States Navy released a formal statement confirming Nathaniel Garrison's service record and honoring his 24 years of distinguished duty. Members of Congress demanded explanations. Civil rights groups called for a federal investigation. The Ridgemont Police Department issued a carefully worded statement expressing confidence in its officers. But it lasted less than 12 hours before being deleted as the evidence overwhelmed every attempt at damage control. Investigators traced the anonymous call that started everything, discovering it had come from a parent seated only a few rows behind the Garrison family. A woman who later admitted she felt uncomfortable seeing a black man in a military uniform and assumed it must be fake. That single assumption, made without evidence and acted on without verification, had been broadcast to millions. As pressure mounted, federal prosecutors requested all body camera footage, internal complaint records, and communications related to Officer Hargrove. For the first time in his career, the system that had quietly protected him was being forced to open its files. And what it revealed would change the case from a public scandal into a criminal reckoning. Federal prosecutors moved quickly. Once the body camera footage was placed side by side with the school live stream, the news broadcast, and the phone videos from parents, the narrative collapsed into something undeniable. The same facts appeared from every angle: no threat, no resistance, no probable cause. Discovery opened files that had never been meant to leave the department. Officer Hargrove's 11 prior complaints were entered into evidence, each one alleging racial profiling, each one dismissed with the same language. Insufficient evidence to sustain. Internal emails between supervisors surfaced, referencing community comfort, neighborhood character, and proactive enforcement. Phrases that now read like warnings ignored for years. Charges were filed in federal court: deprivation of rights under color of law, conspiracy to violate civil rights, false arrest, assault related to the physical contact with Barbara Garrison. The officers who stood beside Hargrove that day were named as co-defendants, their silence and compliance now part of the case. The trial lasted 5 weeks and drew national attention. The courtroom was packed every day with veterans in uniform, civil rights advocates, and members of the Ridgemont community who had watched the arrest unfold live. On the 3rd day, prosecutors played the footage in full, all 9 angles synchronized across large screens. The jury watched Hargrove walk past white families and stop at Nate. They watched the medals pushed aside, the cuffs applied, and they heard Amara's scream echo through the courtroom speakers. Several jurors wept openly. By the time testimony ended, the question was no longer whether a line had been crossed, but how long the system had allowed it to happen. The verdict came swiftly: guilty on all counts. Officer Dustin Hargrove was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison for deprivation of rights under color of law, conspiracy, and false arrest. a punishment that reflected not just a single unlawful decision, but years of unchecked behavior finally brought into the light. Two of the officers who followed his lead received federal sentences for their roles as co-conspirators, while one who had attempted to intervene and later testified was given a suspended sentence. The civil case settled during the damages phase for $22.4 million, the largest individual racial profiling settlement in U.S. history. And the Ridgemont Police Department was placed under a federal consent decree mandating independent oversight, bias training, and strict accountability reforms. Nate Garrison walked free, but changed, using part of the settlement to establish the Garrison Shield Foundation, offering legal support to veterans and service members targeted by racial profiling. Amara eventually delivered the speech she never finished. Not on a football field, but before a congressional committee. Her voice steady as she spoke about a father who served his country for 24 years and was humiliated on the day, meant to honor, sacrifice, and family. The case became required study material at police academies and military institutions nationwide. A reminder captured from 9 different angles that service does not shield you from bias, but truth, when recorded and seen, can still force accountability. Because a man who spent his life protecting his country should never need protection from its police. Yet when he did, justice arrived not through discretion or goodwill, but through undeniable evidence and a public that refused to look away.